Chapter 18 Underground Canada. There was barely time for Julie and Liza to look about the cabin when 3 raps were heard on the door, and the captain's voice whispered, "A friend with friends. Open the door, lassies. There's trouble aboard." Julie turned the lock. The captain's face puffed with anger. "I've had word there's a slave hunter and sheriff coming aboard, with a warrant to search the schooner before we set sail." He peered closely at the girls. "I've a notion that you're the lassies they're making all the stir about." He picked up their bundles and hurried them out the door. They ran down the narrow corridor and up the winding stairs. It was nearly dark on the open deck. Firefly-looking lanterns bobbed here and there. The wind was full of the smell of fish, and it was cold. The girls ran with the captain across the deck to the far side of the schooner, where a little lifeboat, covered with canvas, hung against the side. The captain pulled back the canvas and helped Julie and Liza inside. "You'll find blankets, water, and a bite of food in there. Take care and pray that the good Lord will protect ye." He pulled down the canvas and left them alone. The girls shivered. They felt about for the blankets and crawled under them, partly for warmth and partly for protection. "We're going to jump in the water," Julie said solemnly, "if that sheriff comes near this little boat and takes the canvas off the top." Liza clutched Julie's shoulder. "We're never going back to being slaves again." It was a pledge between them. They were near the end of their journey. Massa Ross had said that Canada and freedom were on the other side of Lake Erie. There was no more walking through woods, or climbing mountains, or hiding in wet swamp water. "After all our trials, Liza," Julie said slowly, "anything is better than going back to slavery." There was a small opening between the canvas and the top of their little boat, and the girls found that by looking through it they could see onto the deck. People walked aboard with baskets and bundles in their arms. Sailors pulled at ropes and lifted rolls of heavy white cloth. Near the plank where the people came on board, the captain stood scowling, his cap still pulled down over one eye and his mustache looking stiff and forbidding. The girls kept their eyes on him. 2 large men shoved their way up the plank and approached him. They could be the sheriff and the slave hunter. Julie and Liza didn't know. They had never seen them before. The men spoke to the captain, waving their arms in his face and pacing impatiently up and down beside him. They seemed like horses pawing at the ground, wanting some kind of action. But the words they spoke were lost to Liza and Julie in the wind and the splashing noise of the lapping water. The captain shook his head. He threw his arms into the air as though in despair. He walked towards the thin stairway. The big men followed. "They are going to search the cabins, Liza," Julie gasped, realizing just how lucky their escape had been. "We're going to get to Canada if we've got to hang on to the bottom of this boat and get pulled across Lake Erie." Julie was angry now. What right did these men have to come chasing them right up to the border, as if they were chasing 2 runaway dogs? She and Liza were not going to be slaves any more. It was night now. The gray fringes of daylight had slipped from the sky. Dark clouds formed and raced above the Mayflower. Then they parted and a half-moon dazzled the schooner with yellow light. The North Star shone above the radiant steadiness. A bell clanged and the boat swayed impatiently as if eager to break away from the shore. The captain and the 2 large men popped out of the stairway. They heaved and puffed and ran to the entrance plank. They shook their fists in the captain's face, but he shoved them onto the plank and waved goodbye. The Mayflower turned. It swung around in the wind, the sails high above, cutting through the water. "I feel like I'm flying through the sky, just like those sails." Liza hugged Julie as they both pushed a wider opening in the canvas so they could see more of the outside. The joy that Julie felt was so intense that there was pain around her heart. "Liza," Julie finally said, "Mama Sally is watching that same North Star." I've got to keep myself from hopin' too much, but I'm hopin' that it's led her to freedom too." Liza began feeling about for the bundle of food and the flask of water. The girls ate and drank all of it. They drew the blankets close around them and watched the billowing sails catch the rushing wind. Without wanting to, they slept in the hollow shelter of the small lifeboat. When the captain found them later, peaceful and warm, he left them to rock through the night and be refreshed for the morning. A crisp, bright morning came quickly with thin white frost powdering the deck. The air was strong with fresh fish smells. They mixed with the land smells of pine and pungent walnut bark and fertile earth still warm from summer. The waves on Lake Erie lapsed into gentle ripples. Sails were pulled in, and the Mayflower drifted ashore. Julie and Liza woke with the sudden stillness of the schooner's landing. They grasped each other's hand for comfort, and once remembering the Mayflower, Lake Erie, and the nearness to Canada. They pushed up the canvas on their little boat, and the bright sun showered over them. The captain ran towards them, shouting with his trilling R's and upturned sentences. "Ahoy!" He waved for the girls to join him. "All passengers ashore!" He grabbed the girls by their arms and ushered them down the plank to the shoreline. He pointed to rows of tall, silent trees and the long, bleak shore. "See those trees?" he shouted. "They grow on free soil." Julie and Liza ran down the plank and jumped on the ground. "Canada?" they cried together. The captain nodded. Liza dropped to her knees. She spread out her arms and kissed the ground. "Bless the Lord, I'm free!" she cried. Julie stood as tall and straight as she could. She pulled the cap from her head and held her head high. There was no longer any need to hide her black skin. She was Julie, a free person. She was not a slave. "Thank you, Lord," she said aloud. She filled her lungs as full as she could with the air of the new free land. No one else was near them except the captain, who was wiping tears from his eyes and blowing his nose. But he seemed nervous and jumpy, and kept watching each passenger who walked from the schooner. "Ye are safe now," he said warmly to the girls, "and it does my heart good to have brought ye here." Then he lowered his voice. "But ye must remember that I must go back to Ohio this very day. I can't be getting myself arrested for helping slaves escape to freedom, and I can't be revealing that I'm a conductor on the Underground Railway, even though my part of the train goes on top of the water." He laughed suddenly. Julie looked at the captain with new admiration. In her great joy to be standing on the soil of Captain, she'd forgotten how this man was risking his job, maybe his life, to bring them across Lake Erie on the Mayflower. "Liza and I will never forget how you and all the other people of the Underground Railway helped us, Captain," Julie said. She wanted to give him something, but her bundle was limp and empty. Liza seemed not to hear them. She was still kneeling on the ground praying. "I'm giving ye a little money for Mr. Ross," said the captain, awkwardly shoving some paper bills into Julie's hand. "Far down the shore there is a colored man with a cart wagon to take ye and your friend to town of St. Catharines. Mr. Ross arranged it. Your cousin Lester has a job in the town, and he'll take care of ye for a bit." Julie looked quickly down the long stretch of rocks and sand that ran beside the lapping blue water of the great Lake Erie, and sure enough, there was a man with a cart waiting beside one of the roads.